Hello everyone, my name is Parry Stelter. A lot of people refer to me as Pastor Parry Stelter. I established Word of Hope Ministries about 7 years ago as sort of a grassroots ministry that started when I graduated from seminary back in 2009. I also had the privilege of meeting several people that worked and volunteered at Hope Mission, and that's where I met Martina, and so I really enjoyed reading her book, Evil Lurking. And what I want to do is just briefly give you a bit of my story. I am from the generation which is called the 60 scoop generation, and so is my wife Angeline. I'm 52 years old. I was put into the foster care system at a very, very young age. And so most of the stories that I have that have to do with suffering that I have been through have to do with generations of intergenerational trauma. My mother and my uncles and aunts went to residential schools, and I, like I said, went through the foster care system. Although I ended up with a stable family at the age of about 2 years old, and it was a Christian family, I was moved around to about a dozen different places before the age of 2. My mother had been institutionalized in Alberta Hospital after her birth with me, after her birth with my sister who's a year older, and after the birth of my brother who's 2 years older than me. And so my mother brought about 7 children into this world. And so she was involved with child welfare right from the very start of having children. And so it's kind of traumatic when I go back down memory lane, but there's a lot of healing that has happened in my life, and this process and journey of healing is ongoing. It's never 100% complete, because as long as we have breath in our lungs, we're always going to have a certain amount of struggle. But for those of us who remain resilient and persevere and push forward, we can have a very fulfilling life. Even if we have gone through different forms of abuse and trauma. These things aren't easy. I remember reading my file from my own child welfare involvement, and I guess I was given some liquid Valium at a very young age when I woke up in the morning, and also excuse me, when I would go to bed at night. And I guess I was very disturbed for quite some time. I would destroy furniture. I would be mean to my adopted sister. I was never officially adopted. Although I stayed with the Stelter family from ages 2 to 18, I was never officially adopted. I always was connected with the child welfare system and always had a worker. And even when I take a look in my own file, I always saw child psychologists, I always saw workers, and I always saw psychiatrists. And so apparently seeing these psychologists and psychiatrists would be very disturbing to me. I guess I would act up for about a week after seeing psychologists. And so when I take a look at my own history, when I take a look at my own file, some of the things that were written about me from workers, it seems that going to these psychologists and psychiatrists as a toddler, as an adolescent, as a young teen, really didn't seem to help a whole lot. It just seemed that that most of the progress that I made was based on being in a loving and caring family. And so I think that speaks volumes to anything and everything that you might go through in life. And so some of the essential concepts towards healing that I have experienced is tell parts of your story to at least someone. You don't always have to wait until you're in a, let's say, professional environment with a worker of some kind, or an official counselor of some kind, or even a chaplain. Just learn to tell your story and speak the truth about what happened to you. And also learn to enter into a life of forgiveness. In a sense, we have to forgive ourselves for being so hard on ourselves over the years, but we also have to learn to forgive those that have harmed us in any way, shape, or form. And so that is obviously easier said than done, but it is definitely a process that we have to be willing to walk into and find other people that are willing to walk with us and listen to our story. That's actually why, as an adult for several years, I have gone to a Christian counselor and received, I guess you could say, therapy for myself, because I get to go and talk to somebody that's going to give me they're going to give me their full attention for a full 45 to 50 minutes straight. It's really hard to find, even within family and friends, somebody that's actually going to sit down and give you their full attention for that amount of time. And so I have found that very helpful. We need to be agents of change. How did I come to embrace biblical concepts of change and healing and forgiveness? Well, literally, it has been through struggling with my own journey of healing. I have literally fought for my life through dealing with these aspects of change in my life. Many times, we as people who have gone through a lot of different types of abuse can be seen as resilient people. And so to some extent, resiliency is an instinctual type of thing. We instinctively do certain things to survive, but the key is to enter into that journey of healing so that we don't just survive, but we actually learn to thrive and tap into our full potential and make the most of our lives. Everyone's life has an expiry date on it. Our lives are very short, and so we need to learn to make the most of these opportunities. One of the ways that I express myself, which has been a major part of my healing journey, has been writing. I guess you can say I am writing more and more professionally these days, as sort of a hobby, but more and more as a career. I first realized I had the gift of writing when I started writing poems at a young age, not really young, but as a young adult. At the age of about 21, when I went back to finish my high school through an adult upgrading type of program, and then that launched me into a lifetime of post-secondary education. This program that I was involved with, this educational program, was a smaller program. It was an Indigenous run program, and they had these, I guess you could say, writing contests, and so I submitted some poems and they got published in some of the local bulletins or pamphlets that we had going around. And so that's where I came to first learn that I think I had a knack for writing. And so then I would approach different Indigenous newspapers and see if they would be interested in some articles. And so I wrote for several Indigenous newspapers for a number of years. And then I took a break from writing for a while because my life went through a season of instability. And so now I write for several newspapers and magazines, some of them local and some of them are national, and some of them are more international or distributed across North America. And then I did a form of self-publishing where I've published 2 books now, and so they've been well received. And so a lot of my writing has to do with biblical forms of reconciliation between Indigenous people and non-Indigenous people. And so one thing I've come to learn is that both Indigenous and non-Indigenous people alike have mutually a lot to learn about forgiveness and listening to each other's stories. And so through being connected with Martina and writing the foreword to her book and reading her book, I entered into this intense journey of reading and reflecting on her book. It really forces you out of your comfort zone, but in a good way. For myself, I guess in my life I've been guilty of being an abuser to a certain extent, but also being somebody who was abused. And so I wasn't an abuser to the extent that I ended up in prison. They weren't those types of abuses, but enough trouble to cause concern with child welfare, enough trouble to have things like being a womanizer when I was younger, just sleeping with women just for the sake of sleeping with women and not caring about the emotional attachment or the outcome. And so I've been sober 20 years now, and so I left that life of instability behind me as I sobered up and as I got married. And so this character within Evil Lurking, Demetrius, is an interesting character because this character reveals, I think, it obviously reveals the behind the scenes look at somebody who is in a Christian community but has been an abuser, and he's a prime example of somebody who is totally out of control. But as I was taking a look at this character, it reminded me a little bit about myself, but not to the extent of the reality of who Demetrius was, but I could just see a little glimpse of myself, but more importantly, I could see the impact that these types of abusers have on the community at large and the Christian community, the damage that they can cause, and how it's important to deal with these situations in the light of the gospel. And I can see the dilemma that Demetrius was in about revealing his true self and being willing to endure the consequences, and how hard that must have been. But even harder for the people that were the victims or at the brunt end of that type of deceit and lying, and how people like Demetrius get caught up in this vicious cycle of abuse because, like in the story, he was afraid that he would lose his job, he would be afraid that people will look down on him, and these things are all true. Those things are true. He would have lost his job if he would have came right out, and it would have caused damage if he would have told the truth earlier on. But the damage was compiled more and more as life went on for this person. And so there's definitely a lot of tense times as I was reading through this book, but it really forces you to be a truth speaker. There's always two sides to each story, and then there's the truth. And I think that's the situation in any given situation. There's a little bit of truth in both sides of the story, but then there's the actual truth. And so this character resembles the tension within the book about this sensitive issue, especially within the church, within the Christian community, of how the victims suffer in silence, and many times it goes into our conscious minds and heart, but also into our subconscious minds and hearts, where we react to certain things in a certain way, and we don't even realize we're reacting in certain ways because of what we have been through. And so the abuser needs to confess and repent of any wrongdoing that he or she has done. And so that must be hard for the abuser, but it's even harder for the people that have to walk through that journey of healing and through all the different stages of grieving that anyone goes through when they experience a loss of identity, a loss of self-respect, a loss of spirituality, a loss in the belief in the church. And so I've also experienced that shedding many tears is a great process of healing. If you're entering into this journey of healing and you feel the tears coming on, don't stop them, because I believe God uses those tears to help to heal us. But for most of us, we need a little bit more structure in that. Just tears in itself is not enough. We need to find somebody to listen to us. We need to find people that believe in us. We need to find people that have been through similar situations that we have been through. I don't think I would have liked the story to end in any other way. Why? Because it was not my story to tell. It was Martina's story to tell. And so the way it ended was perfect, because it was her story. And so each of us has a story to tell. Maybe we're guilty of being an abuser to some extent ourselves, but maybe we've been abused. Maybe we've experienced people being mean, just outright mean. And there's many different things that we can go through in life, but I have a special connection to suffering because of what my parents went through, what my uncles and aunts went through, and then what I've gone through as a 60 scoop survivor, which is a direct continuation of the trauma that happened in residential schools. And now entering into this ministry where I listen to both sides of the story, to Indigenous people tell about their doubt in humanity, their doubt in the church, their doubt about Christianity. But I've also come across many Indigenous people who love the Lord and love the church, but also taking time to listen to non-Indigenous people as well. That's the journey of healing that I'm in, and experience that tension all the time, because let's say the typical male non-Indigenous person thinks the reality and the solution to many problems is just get off your butt and get to work, just find a job. And they're thinking in their minds, I work hard for a living and I provide for my family and I'm a hard worker and I'm moving forward. Just get off your butt and find a job, do something. And so many of these solutions can seem very simple to people like that, but they don't understand the trauma that many Indigenous people have gone through. And it's not so simple as just to get a job. Just like it's not so simple just to shed a few tears and then that's the start and end of your healing journey. There has to be a process in place of speaking the truth, and sometimes you might have to do some therapeutic things like write a letter to your abuser, or if you were an abuser of any kind, like if you were abused but also guilty of being an abuser in different ways, you might have to write a letter to the people that you abused or neglected or didn't care for. If you were a bad parent, then maybe you have to write a letter to your child. And maybe it doesn't always have to be something that is actually given to the other person. Sometimes it's therapeutic just to write a letter like that and just tuck it away. Or write a letter and then burn it and get rid of it. And as the flames and ashes go up from that letter, you can symbolically say, I'm releasing this. God forgives me, I forgive myself. Or if you're writing a letter to an abuser, you can write a letter and then burn it and say, as the flames are going up, I forgive this abuser. Or you can get into role playing, where you pretend that the abuser is sitting in front of you and you talk to them. Or if you had a parent that has passed away and you wanted to talk to them about different issues, then you can, in a safe environment, go through these types of things as well. And so that sort of leads to some of the work that I do. There's a few different types of workshops that I do. And a prime example of a reconciliation workshop that I do is understanding Indigenous people more. And so that type of workshop is mainly geared to non-Indigenous people. And that particular workshop really has nothing to do with the Christian community or the non-Christian community. It's just simply to educate non-Indigenous people more about the history of Indigenous people and some of the things that they struggle with and why they struggle with them, so that the next time they are around an Indigenous person, they have that much more of an understanding of the things that Indigenous people have been through. And then I have more specific workshops where they're geared towards the Christian community, and I talk about the different things that the Indigenous Christian community struggle with a lot of cultural issues, like things about the use of the hand drum or the sweat lodge or smudging, all these different things within the church, because there really is a broad spectrum of those types of beliefs within the Indigenous Christian community. On the one hand, you have different indigenous Christian groups that want to embrace the traditional aspects of their culture into Christianity. And then many people also believe that they don't need any of that stuff anymore. They like Christianity the way it is. And so there's a broad stroke of a belief system within the indigenous Christian community across North America. And so there's not just one way that indigenous Christians approach Christianity. There's many different things going on within the dynamics of that whole issue. And so I hope there are some things that I've said that have encouraged you and that have caused you to think more deeply about the issue of abuse that happens within the community at large and within the Christian community. And so may God bless you in your journey as you continue to seek healing in a variety of different ways. Thank you.